I think I met a skinwalker from Z. Growing up in Arizona, myths and legends are a part of life. Native traditions, mystic places, vortexes, UFO abductions, and dozens of other stories of the unknown that I always found fascinating. I grew up spending a lot of time wandering around the desert and the mountains, hunting, camping, etc. So I felt very at home in the wilderness. One late spring day on one of my many hiking adventures, I wandered off trail and after several hours came upon a small group of old mud adobe houses. A few people heard me coming and came out of the houses to investigate, and after apparently making the collective decision that I was not a threat, one of the elders dressed in old-style traditional native clothing and a headdress came over to greet me. The man spoke slowly and told me that I had wandered onto a Navajo reservation and asked me if I was lost or if I needed help. When I told him no, I was lost, but intentionally he chuckled and invited me in to eat with his family. The next several hours were one of the great experiences of my life. The whole thing was like being thrown back in time. While we ate and talked, others from the surrounding houses began coming over to join us, and I got the feeling they didn't get many outside visitors. We shared stories for hours about life, family, year history in the area, and time spent in the wild. And the longer we talked, the more they opened up, and the more interesting the elders' stories got. Throughout the time, there was one man who never spoke. He just sat out of the circle listening and watching me. At one point, I told them I did what I called my walkabouts every year around September, where I would go out by myself into the wilderness for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. And this got the attention of the one silent old man. When I finished, he came over to the circle around the fire, sat directly on the ground in front of me and asked me to join him on the ground. He told me that years ago he used to do the same thing and went on to tell me about the canyon he went to. He described it as a dangerous but magic place, and that I would see the world differently if I came back. If? Must be for dramatic effect. When he finished, he invited me over to his home. The house was small, and through an open door in the back room, I could see it was filled with various animal pelts, coyotes and wolves mostly. He walked over and closed that door, then picked up and handed me an old map and some written directions that seemed like he had been holding on to them for a long time, and just walked away into that back room and closed the door behind him. It was late, and one of the families had invited me to stay the night, which I gladly did. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, one of the old women came over to me with something in her hands, handed me a talisman, and simply said, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire," then just walked away. September came, and as I packed for my walkabout, I saw the talisman in a drawer and something felt right about taking it with me. After a beautiful drive, I was very happy to find the Forest Service road marked on the old map. The entrance to the area was remote and overgrown, and tough to get to even in my Jeep, and took me much longer to get to than expected. So I decided to make camp and start the hike in the morning. After a few hours on a trail that looked like it had been forgotten, I came to a stream and the entrance to the secret valley. It was a narrow crack in the tall cliffs with about 4 feet of water running gently through, but too narrow for a kayak or canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and began the wade sideways through the chest-deep water. The crack in the cliff seemed to go on forever, but after almost 2 hours I came to the place where it opened up into a small lake in an incredible valley surrounded by tall rock faces. This may have been the most remote place I've ever been, in the sense that there was no sign that people had ever been there. No trash, no bullet casings, not even the evidence of campfires. My first night there was the quietest night I've ever spent in the wild. No birds, no frogs, not even crickets. but I didn't feel like I was alone there. In the morning after breakfast, I headed out on my first exploratory hike to explore my new home for the next couple weeks. After being stalked by a mountain lion on a hike about 10 years ago, I make a point of now bringing a pistol with me when I'm out wilderness hiking. After some looking around, I found a narrow path that appeared to be a game trail that led up the side of one of the cliffs and towards what looked like caves from the canyon floor. I made my way up to them and came upon an entrance that was much larger than it appeared from below. I made some noise to alert any possible animals I was there, and made my way inside. The cave was an expansive single chamber that went back a couple 100 feet. As I walked, I inspected as much as I could see with my light, but there was no tracks of any kind in the dirt besides mine. So I decided I was alone in there and pushed on towards the rear of the cave. As I came around the last bend in the cave and approached the end, my headlamp panned across a large pile of bones, some animal, some human, and a very old-looking small candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. This is the first thing that has scared me in as long as I can remember. But focusing my wits, I remembered that there was no other tracks in the cave and figured it was all from a long time ago. I was still a little uneasy as I exited the cave and was ready to get back to camp. As I came out into the light about 75 feet away, there was the largest wolf I've ever seen that looked like it was coming down from standing on its hind legs. It dropped down to all fours on a rock, just began staring at me. Not growling or baring its teeth, just staring. I pulled my .45 and fired 2 shots to the side of it to scare it away, but it didn't even flinch. Not only have I never seen a wolf in this part of northern Arizona, but I have never seen a wild animal that did not at least flinch at the sound of a gunshot. We both stood there staring at each other for a moment. I turned and set my backpack down to grab my binoculars and get a little closer look. But when I turned back, the wolf was gone. I made my way cautiously down the path back towards camp. I have encountered wolves before, and usually it's not the one wolf you can see that should worry you. It's the ones you can't see. So I was extra cautious for the return trip. Back at camp, I made sure my gun was fully loaded and got my recurve bow strung just in case the wolves came back. I have seen plenty of predatory animals on my adventures. It's a part of being in the wilderness, so I wasn't too worried. Just prepared myself the best I could and went over to the lake to go fishing. Within about 20 minutes, I caught 2 of the biggest brown trout I've ever caught. So I decided to stop fishing for the day and take a swim. Back at camp, I made a fire, cleaned my trout, and made dinner while the sun went down. As soon as the sun went down, all of the life in the canyon seemed to go silent again. As I put out my fire and prepared for bed, I noticed there was a small flicker of light coming from the area where the cave I had explored earlier up the cliffside, which didn't make sense. It was a moonless night, and stars don't reflect that way. It couldn't have been the candle I'd seen. It was too old and would not have burned so bright. I decided to keep my gun close and try to get some sleep. I would investigate the cave again the next day. When I woke at sunrise, there was a haze along the ground throughout the whole canyon floor. But as the sun rose, it disappeared quickly and the area came back to life. I made my breakfast, gathered my gun and bow, and headed back up towards the cave. When I reached the entrance, I saw there were still no tracks besides mine around the entrance, and decided to push up the hill further. Just a little further up, I came upon the entrance to another cave, much smaller than the first one. There was a small flat landing with a large, heavily twisted juniper tree that, to my absolute surprise, had many small objects hanging from thin, old-looking ropes tied to the branches. There were bones, but There were also old things definitely made by humans and looked like they were old Native American artifacts. Thinking I might have found the spot where the old man I met on the reservation had stayed when he was there decades ago, I went into the cave. This cave was much different from the first one. Just a few feet in, I noticed the walls were covered in what looked like ceremonial cave paintings. As I pushed further back, the cave got dramatically colder, much colder than it should have been, and the walls were completely covered with the paintings the entire way. When I reached the back of the cave, I was not prepared for what I saw. There was what looked like an old altar made of wood and bones. As I looked around, I saw that a little before the back of the cave, there was another shaft in the ceiling that went up, and on a ledge about 25 feet up sat the small figure of what appeared to be a woman. She was small and pale, with her face painted white, and wearing something like a crown made of woven branches with two small antlers at the front. I stopped and stared for a few minutes, and the figure did not move. So I assumed that it was mummified remains from a long time ago. Not wanting to disturb a burial site, I turned to walk back out of the cave. But I began to walk. I heard what sounded like a faint voice in an unknown ancient language. I instinctively looked back up towards the figure, but it was gone. I was immediately terrified and ran from the cave as fast as I could get out. But my headlamp flickered and died. I made my way out, feeling along the wall to find my way. And the whole way I felt like there was something right behind me. When I saw the first light from the cave entrance, I began to sprint towards it. Just before I made it out, I looked back and there was nothing. So I slowed down, but I could still hear the faint voice, and the volume never changed. When I got outside, all the bones and artifacts hanging from the tree were gone. I ran down the path as fast as I could, headed back to my campsite by the lake. Just as I reached the floor of the canyon, I noticed the large wolf at the tree line to my left, but this time it stayed standing upright on its hind legs. I stopped running, hoping to not initiate its predatory response to chase me. And again, it just stood there staring at me. I reached my campsite safely and immediately began packing up. It was too late in the day to make it out before dark, and I did not want to make the hike out at night with all that was going on. I moved my tent so it would back up to the canyon wall by the crack in the cliffside so I didn't have to worry about anything sneaking up behind me. I built my fire much larger and knew I wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Just as the sun was going down, I began to hear noises coming from the trees, and I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, in the last light of day, I saw the wolf slowly walking around by where the path led out of the trees, and it began to slowly walk towards me. This time, I drew my gun and fired towards the creature, intending to hit it. And while I saw a couple hit the dirt around it, several bullets hit it. Several rounds from a .45 will at least slow down anything I've ever encountered. But this giant wolf kept walking towards me like nothing had happened. I continued to fire at it until the inevitable click of an empty magazine. I reached down and fumbled around in my backpack, looking for my other magazines to reload. And as I lifted it, the talisman the old woman gave me fell out onto the ground. I picked it up and put it around my neck and immediately remembered what she had told me. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I looked around but didn't see my backup magazines, so I grabbed my bow, pulled an arrow that was tipped with a hunting broadhead, and dipped it into the white ashes, drew, and fired. I hit the creature just in front of its right hip, and it let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a person screaming that made my blood curdle. I can hear that noise in my head to this day. It immediately turned and ran back to the trees, and in the flicker of the firelight, I saw the small women with the antler crown standing there waiting for it. They both retreated into the trees, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the same faint voice I had heard in the cave. I spent the night outside of my tent, as awake as I have ever been, but no longer afraid, and at dawn finished packing up so I could get out of that canyon. The next spring, I went back to the small group of houses on the Navajo reservation I had found the year before. I was wearing the talisman as a necklace, and the first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me, and she ran up to give me a big hug. "You heard me," was all she said. I asked the group about the man who had given me the map, as I was almost desperate to talk to him about the experience I had, so I could compare it to his own. They told me that he had disappeared shortly after I had visited them the first time and had not been back. Strangely, when I tried to tell them what had happened to me, no one would let me tell the story, and the oldest man there who sat in the corner kept mumbling the words, "Yinal Lushi." We all once again sat and shared other stories of life and a meal. Before I left the next morning, I found the old woman who had given me the talisman and offered it back to her. She smiled and told me I had a good heart, then just closed my hands around it, telling me to keep it to watch over my next walkabout. I went back to that small village on the reservation several times over the next 10 years or so, till I moved to Oregon, but they never let me tell them what happened. I never went back to the canyon, and while curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, I don't think I ever will. Never shoot a skinwalker. From dark and creepy. My two buddies and I went on a hunting trip for bull elk last November, and we were having a great time, to say the least. That, however, soon would change after what we saw on the third day. Now, I'm not one for superstition, and I don't believe in ghosts at all, but what we saw out there really changed my view about those sorts of things. The trip started out normally after we parked our trailers at camp. We got there a day early before the hunt officially started, so we could settle in and get some scouting done. Only Eric and I had licenses because Brian didn't draw out this year, but he wanted to come along with us anyway. Brian also brought along his German shepherd named Lucy, which stayed back at camp with a leash that was connected to a metal spike. The spike was so deep in the ground that I wondered if we would be able to get it out. I asked Brian, and he just told me that his dog was so strong that it had to be that deep. I enjoyed playing with Lucy. She was always excited to see me and would greet me by jumping up on two legs and trying to lick my face. Eric, however, was not amused by her and would constantly yell at her to leave him alone. Anyway, the first 2 days we saw so many cow elk in valleys and on sides of the mountains that I thought for sure we would see some bulls out there, but there were none among them. It wasn't until the third day of the hunt that we saw a bull elk, but it was too far away to take a shot at. And even if we were able to hit it, it would take hours trying to pack that thing out. So that evening, we decided to hunker down next to some fallen trees and were able to watch a hillside. While we were surveying the area, Brian spotted a coyote about 250 yards, walking to a small pond of water strangely as if it was maimed. Eric took out his binoculars to take a closer look, and he started to describe it, saying, "That coyote, it ain't right looking. It has a hunch on its back like a bear, and its jaw. Oh man, its damn jaw seems like it's been broken, and now it's just drooping there like a dead fish." "Let me see those binos," I asked curiously with an outstretched hand. Eric handed them to me, and as he did, he seemed to grasp his gun tightly. I took them and looked at the animal and said, "You're right. That thing's jaw is just hanging there. Also, did you happen to notice its hair? It's so long and unevenly dispersed." I then handed the binoculars to Brian, and he looked at the coyote for 1 second and screamed, "Shh! Brian, shut up. We're hunting," Eric whispered harshly. "What did you see?" I asked as I looked at his shocked facial expression. Brian looked at his feet as he muttered, I saw my dog Lucy, but it wasn't her. I don't know what that was. It couldn't have been your dog. When I looked at it, it looked like a dying coyote. It didn't have the large black spot on its back or your dog's strawberry red sides and underbelly," I said in a plain yet confused manner. "Well, since we ain't gonna see anything out here 'cause you scream like a baby, I'm gonna put that coyote out of its misery," Eric said angrily as he raised his rifle and looked through the scope. A large shot followed, and we saw the animal drop down soon after. It was a clean kill, and Eric was curious about seeing what was wrong with the animal up close, so he started getting ready to hike out. As he got his stuff together, he said, "You probably just didn't get a good look at it, Brian. Your dog is fine." Brian stood up, and as he brushed the dirt off his butt, he replied, "I swear I saw my dog, but an evil, demented version of it with human eyes, but you guys are probably right. There's no way she could have had the strength to yank out the metal stake holding her back at camp." "Well, let's go find out the truth about this animal," I said somewhat excitedly as I started walking toward the dead animal. It took us about half an hour to hike over to it, and we lost sight of the animal's corpse as we had to pass through some trees. Once we finally got to the spot where the animal had dropped, there was no corpse, just a puddle of blood. However, the blood was blackish and very dense. Eric observed the scene and started to scratch his head as he said, "I could have sworn I shot that thing straight through its heart. There's no way it could have just gotten back up and walked off." I had an eerie feeling about the whole situation, and Brian was still afraid that it might have been his dog that got shot. Eric, however, noticed a trail of blood leading into a dark tree line. Without asking, he started to follow it, and he loaded his gun. As he did, me and Brian were both freaked out and just watched Eric as he went into the forest. He soon went out of sight, and Brian and I could not leave him here, so we waited. I passed the time by taking a skinny stick and poking at the puddle of blood. It smelled terrible, and the aroma hit me pretty hard, so much so that my stomach convulsed and I threw up. "You okay?" Brian asked as he put his hand on my back. Before I could answer, there was a loud shot that echoed through the trees, and we both looked at the direction it came from. "Must have found the animal," I said as I spit into the grass. As soon as I said this, we could now see Eric, but he was full-on sprinting. "Run!" he screamed as he ran at us. I noticed that he must have dropped his gun because he wasn't carrying it. I was about to ask him what happened, but Brian grabbed my arm and yanked me towards where we had parked the truck. Without hesitation, I ran. We soon made it back to the truck, and my shoulder hurt from the rubbing of the gun strap. I looked back at Eric, who slowed down for nothing. I soon looked behind him and saw nothing chasing us. So I opened the truck and got in without worry. Eric then climbed in and told me to hit the gas and go. I was so perplexed on what Eric saw out there, and I knew that he hardly ever got scared of anything. So this started to freak me out. I started driving fast back to camp, and I asked Eric, "What did you see out there that was scary enough to make you drop your gun?" "I don't know, man. That was no damn animal." I followed the trail of blood, and it stopped at the base of a tree. And I was wondering how a coyote was able to climb a tree. But when I looked up, I saw this hairy humanoid creature there. It smelled so freaking bad. Eric went on about how scary that thing was, and how he was done with the hunting trip and wanted to go home. We soon pulled into camp and mutually decided that we were going home. I started to pack my things and then felt like something was missing. I then thought to myself, "Lucy? Where is Brian's dog? She usually always is so excited to see us back at camp. She can't stop barking and whining to be set free." As soon as I thought this, Brian started screaming and crying. I ran over to where he was and saw that his dog was gone. However, on further inspection, I noticed what Brian was looking at. Something had pulled out the metal stake in the ground and strung Lucy up on a nearby tree and had skinned her. Brian just could not stop crying, and Eric ran over to see what was wrong and just stood there jaw-dropped and frozen. He then muttered, "She was skinned alive. There's a bunch of bruising caused by struggling around her neck where the collar is." "Shut up, Eric. You ain't helping," I said as I put my shoulder around Brian, who had unstrung his dog's body from the tree. "Skinwalker," Eric said in a low tone of voice as he looked into the distance. He then screamed, "It's a damn skinwalker." I followed his gaze and saw an animal that looked like Lucy, but it had human eyes and a sickly green glazed-looking coat of fur. Brian stopped crying and just stood there, eyes locked on the beast. Eric then whispered with his voice quivering, "We all run to the truck on a count of 3. Just leave everything else." Brian and I slowly nodded and agreed to the plan. "Okay, 3, 2, 1. Eric whispered sharply, and we all took off like a pack of gazelles for the truck. We hopped in, and as soon as we did, we saw the skinwalker lunge at the U.S. and struck the right side door with such a powerful blow that nearly tipped over the whole truck. It didn't stop me whatsoever, and I drove out of there faster than I ever could have. After that, none of us ever went hunting again in that area. We never even went back to claim our camping trailers and supplies. It was too terrifying to think that what happened to Brian's dog could happen to us, and that thing would walk around in our skin. Since that experience, I am now a superstitious person. I'm a security guard at Skinwalker Ranch. I almost died during my first shift. From Jay, the dark room was filled with the whirring sounds of hard drives and the pale blue glow of computer monitors. An occasional burst of static from one of the walkie-talkies at the charging station would break the silence between me and the other security guard, who was trying unsuccessfully to keep his eyes open. "Doesn't anything interesting ever happen around here?" I asked Peter, my new supervisor. "I mean, I figured most of the rumors were bogus, but isn't anything about this place real? Skinwalkers, glowing orbs? You gotta have a few stories at least." He had his feet up on the desk in the security office, and several dozen monitors showing different camera angles of the property were arranged before us. The billionaire who owned the ranch had spared no expense trying to capture the paranormal presences of Skinwalker Ranch on camera. But so far from what I understood, he had been completely unsuccessful. "You watched one too many History Channel specials, kid," he said, barely opening his eyes to look at me. I realized he was falling asleep. "There's nothing here but a rich guy with too much cash and an army of underpaid acolytes like you and me, busting our asses to document a whole lot of nothing. So what's with the body armor? And the tasers and all the safety equipment? I'm surprised they don't have us packing heat with all this stuff we have strapped to us." We looked like SWAT officers, which was completely ridiculous considering our job descriptions mostly involved eating boxed lunches and trying not to bore ourselves to death. "Dude, shut up and quit asking so many questions. One day the old man will get wise that E.T. ain't coming. But until then, just enjoy the gravy train, okay?" I grunted in agreement and sat watching the monitors as Peter began to snore. Looking at the time, I saw it was past 3 a.m. Only another 4 hours until the morning shift arrived. But this was the hardest time of night to stay awake. I needed another cup of coffee or I would soon be asleep like Peter. And at least one of us had to keep an eye out for the boss. There was no way of knowing when the old eccentric billionaire would come wandering over for a look at the video feeds, and to make sure his hired goons were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. He'd been known to pop in for surprise visits, Since I needed the job and couldn't afford to lose it, I decided a fresh cup of coffee was in order. I snuck out of the security office and went into the adjoining room, where a single-serve coffee machine was plugged in on a counter beside a mini fridge. Yawning, I stuck a pot in and snapped the mechanism closed, pressing the button for a large coffee. The machine began to chug and click and gurgle before spitting out some hot, steaming black brew. Taking the cup with me back into the security office, I was unsurprised to find Peter still snoring. I blew on my coffee and sat back down, looking at the monitors with forced open eyes. Something caught my attention on the monitor to my right. The barn door was swinging open, slapping against the adjoining wall in the strong wind. It wasn't open before. "Peter, wake up. Why's the barn door open?" I had to shake him a few times and ask him the question again, but eventually he blinked his eyes open long enough to peer at the monitor. "Bossman's probably out there polishing the ATVs or something. Why do you care? If there was a perimeter breach, it would have set off an alarm. Cleaning the four-wheelers at 3 a.m. Why would he do that?" Peter opened his eyes up all the way. "Yeah, you're right. It could be a test. He likes to do that sometimes, to make sure we're not sleeping on the job. You go out there, newbie. I'll stay here and watch the feeds." He put his helmet over his eyes, and I could hear him resume snoring a moment later. If it was the boss out there, I wasn't going to cover for Peter, I thought to myself. This guy was useless. It seemed like he didn't know the first thing about property protection or security procedures. I was worried if something really did happen, he'd be useless, or would do more harm than good in a crisis. But luckily, we were on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. Besides, nothing bad ever happened at Skinwalker Ranch, despite its reputation. Or so I thought. As I made my way out through the hallways of the farmhouse, which had been converted into a makeshift security compound, I found myself feeling nervous. Something about this wasn't right. The idea that the boss was out in the barn at 3 a.m., testing our preparedness, didn't jive with me, but I supposed it was possible. Stepping out into the cool night air, I looked across the driveway at the barn, not more than 100 yards away. The noise of the untethered door banging against the wood could be heard loudly now and sounded to my ears like an omen of evil. A fat orange moon hung low in the sky, its awful gravity pulling me towards the blood-red building. I found myself standing before the open door, the smell of hay wafting out from inside. Close the door and go back to the security office, I thought suddenly. Whatever you do, don't step foot inside that barn. It's cursed. It's evil. Stay out. A voice started murmuring from the shadows inside, as if in agreement. It sounded like a man, but their tones were hushed and quiet, difficult to understand. "Who's in there?" I called out, taking my flashlight from my belt and shining it into the barn. No one answered, and the mumbling, chanting voice continued. "Peter, come in," I said into the radio. But as soon as the words escaped my lips, the walkie-talkie made a painful, high-pitched squeal of feedback, then clicked loudly and was dead. "Hello?" I said again into the useless device. There was no response, and I had no way of knowing if he'd heard me or not. It's probably just the boss trying to catch us slacking off, I thought to myself, considering what Peter had said earlier. I would simply go inside and turn on the light. Then the rich owner would give me a pat on the back for my prompt action and response to the practice scenario. With that thought firmly in mind, I entered the barn, my heart pounding. My body knew what my mind had not yet realized, that I was in terrible danger. When I got inside the barn, the huge wooden door slammed shut behind me, and I knew I was in trouble. The murmuring, chanting thing in the darkness continued its deliberate cadence as I turned and tried to get out, clawing at the door and trying desperately to pull it open. One of my fingernails broke off and began to bleed, but I didn't notice that until later as the adrenaline was pumping through my veins. A moment later, the door itself disappeared. Its edges dissolved into the surrounding wood, and I backed away from it, terrified, looking up at where it had been a moment before. Such a thing was impossible, and yet it had just happened before my eyes. I was trapped. Spinning around, I saw the thing in the shadows, still chanting and now swaying back and forth. Its silhouette in the darkness reminded me of a shaman mixed with a wolfman, holding a wand or a scepter of some kind. The head of the scepter rattled and made awful, fleshy sounds like teeth being shook in a sack made of skin. I tried not to listen to the things the creature was saying, as the words felt like worms crawling through my ears and into my gray matter, invading my thoughts. It was like an itch that I couldn't scratch, like a dozen black flies crawling on my brain where I couldn't get to them with my fingers, taking occasional bites and sampling the local cuisine inside my skull. "Get out of my head!" I heard myself scream, but the wicked chanting continued. The language was ancient and unknowable, clutching my skull, that horrible itching sensation of something worming its way into my mind continued, undeterred by my protests. I looked around and saw other dark forms were in the barn with me. They looked like shadows at first, moving along the ground like dark puddles, spreading outwards from a surrounding oil spill. But then the things began to take shape and rise up, shedding their two-dimensional forms and turning into humanoid beings with pitch-black features. The shadow creatures moved slowly and deliberately, their mouths yawning open as they approached me with curious faces. Their features were black holes within their dark forms. They reached out towards me as the chanting thing in the corner raised up its hands, like a preacher in a demonic prayer service, its voice rising higher and higher in volume. Red painted walls all around me began to drip and bleed, revealing ancient druidic symbols which were carved deep into the wood underneath. Suddenly, the entire barn felt like a living thing, as if I was inside the belly of some great, horrible beast, which was inhaling and exhaling all around me. It was hot in the barn and humid, despite the chill of the night air outside. The temperature was rising quickly, causing sweat to pour from my brow, running into my eyes and making them sting with pain. As the shadow creatures started to inspect me more closely, each one took its turn leaning in close, running its oily hands over me and judging me somehow. They made whispering noises back and forth, and a few took sample bites of me with shadowy mouths, leaving oddly non-bleeding wounds in my flesh. I cried out in pain each time, and it seemed like they were shushing me as they raised up their extremities to my face with every noise I made. For some reason, I found myself obliging. Finally, one of them seemed to settle on taking me for themselves, as the chatter between the shadow creatures stopped, and it smiled broadly, looking pleased with itself. The creature resembled a black panther about to pounce as it leaned in toward me. It looked as if it was preparing to dive into my mouth to make a home inside my body permanently, when the huge wooden barn door, which had previously vanished, crashed in behind me. Glaring spotlights filled the space, and I looked around to see the shadow things were dispersing. The shaman creature in the corner, who had been chanting in wicked tones, made a circular motion with his wand, and a dark hole appeared in the wall, which he proceeded to exit through. It disappeared a second later, closing tightly behind him. Looking around, I saw the barn around me was no longer painted bright red. It was old and run down, dilapidated and out of use. The ceiling was broken and sagging, revealing stars through a gaping hole up above. "What the hell are you doing in here, kid?" one of the security guards was asking me. "You're not supposed to be in here. Nobody's allowed in this building. It's not safe." But Peter told me to go check it out. He was sleeping. I never told you to go in here. I haven't even seen you since you disappeared earlier," said Peter, stepping out from behind the other guard. "You're lucky these guys came to check in here after hearing you screaming. This building is off limits. Can't you see it's ready to fall down any second? But I was with you just 10 minutes ago. You said, 'Don't put words in my mouth, kid. And don't make up stories. I didn't tell you to do anything. I turned around and you were gone. I figured you went home, to be honest. Thought maybe this job wasn't for you." I stuttered, unsure what to say or how to respond to this. I was sure Peter had told me to go out to the barn to check it out. Was I remembering it wrong? Was I really that tired? Or had I been spending my shift with an imposter? How was I supposed to know what was true? "Looks like we might have a 278, said one of the guards nervously. "The skinwalkers are back. Don't talk about them," snapped the supervisor. "You know the rules. You talk about them and that's when they show up. Everybody get inside, now. Buddy protocols. You need to go to the bathroom, take your buddy with you. You know the rules, Peter. We've got a code black by the sounds of it." Everyone drew their weapons, and I saw these other guards had guns with odd, futuristic attachments on the barrels. Strange, translucent white pieces that looked like oversized silencers. I hadn't seen any of these people when I arrived, for the first half of my training shift. It turned out they lived on the property and were paid handsomely to be on call to respond to any events as they occurred. "You guys gotta be kidding. Skinwalkers? Really?" my supervisor asked as we hustled inside. Peter looked unimpressed by all that was happening, and I realized that he didn't believe in anything supernatural. He was a die-hard skeptic of such things. "Guys, come on," he said dryly. "This is complete paranoia. The kid just had a panic attack or something. You don't really believe in this stuff, do you?" "Quiet," one of the heavily armored guards snarled at him. "You don't know shit about what happens in this place. You've only been here a month. The boss should have known better than to let you train the new guy. He could have gotten himself killed." I felt queasy and numb all over when he said that, realizing it was true. If they hadn't arrived when they did, who knew what might have happened? Peter didn't say another word. Instead, he just made an annoyed sound and followed the rest of us as the formation began moving towards the door to the farmhouse. He stayed back a little ways, as if in protest. Just as we were about to enter the house, I heard him stop from a few yards away, muttering to himself. I paused to look back, stopping where I was in the doorway as the rest of the team went inside. I held the door open for him, hoping he would follow. But instead he began to yell in a loud, agitated voice. "You're all a bunch of suckers. You know that? Skinwalkers? Really? This place is just a busted-down old ranch in the middle of nowhere. There's no curse. There's no monsters. Watch." He turned around, facing the other direction. "Oh, skinwalkers. Come and get me. Look, fresh meat for you skinwalkers. What, aren't you hungry?" Looking back at us, he smiled, then started laughing mockingly at all of us. "See? There's nothing out here." He made a surprised sound and turned suddenly, just as something began to appear from the shadows. It was large and hulking, its form an inkblot against a starless midnight sky. Gah! The sound it made was a deep growl like a territorial wolf, only much, much larger. Its legs were long and stilted, giving it an unnatural look. Its fur was bare in places, mangy and full of clumps and burrs. "Nice doggy," Peter said, backing away, his hands extended outward defensively. "That's not a dog. Get inside the damn house, now!" screamed a voice from over my shoulder, deafening me. Several other dark shapes emerged from the periphery of my vision, crowding around Peter and surrounding him. He began to run, but it was too late. They leapt at him, knocking him to the ground with a brutal impact. It looked like a highlight football tackle, his upper body being sent one direction. Then his legs were slammed into from the opposite angle, causing his body to contort and bend in two different ways. When he landed, he looked unable to breathe or speak, and I wondered if the wind had been knocked out of him, or if they'd broken his spine. I instinctively began to run towards him, thinking I could save him, but one of the nearby guards grabbed my arm and pulled me back. If not for that, I'd probably be dead. "Squad, firing positions," the guy in charge of the group yelled, and they all fell into formation. Meanwhile, the demon wolves were tearing Peter to pieces. One of them had its jaws around his face and was squeezing like a vice grip on his skull. The other one was shredding his torso with its teeth. "Ready! Aim! Fire!" The group of pseudo-soldiers around me started unleashing semi-automatic rifle rounds into the hellhounds, each one tracing a green trajectory which streaked across the sky like tracer bullets. There was no immediate reaction from the beasts at first, and I thought they were making no impact. But then the dog-like creatures started snapping and wincing at the bullets as they were grazed by them. "Don't let up. Keep the pressure on." Instead of retreating, the shadow creatures snarled and began to stalk towards the group of us. The bullets were doing little to stop their advance, as if they were being sprayed with water pistols. It merely seemed to annoy them further. One leapt suddenly with lightning-quick speed, pouncing on a guard nearby. He screamed as the thing started shredding his Kevlar, cutting through the protective gear like warm butter with its claws. Peter was no longer moving or breathing, and the remaining guards were quickly losing their courage. "Fall back!" the leader of them shouted, and I hustled inside, this time not even hesitating. We slammed the door shut and listened to the screams of the guards who didn't make it back inside. The creatures didn't kill them quickly, though. Those who were left alive died slowly, as the hellish wolves tortured them, making them scream for help in an attempt to draw us back outside to rescue them. After a while, I plugged my ears, unable to stand the sounds of their dying screams one moment longer. They didn't stop until the sun came up, and by then the creatures were gone. You'd think there would be some evidence, that one of the surveillance systems would have caught something, but the cameras showed nothing the next day. I saw the tapes myself. They showed nothing but a peaceful farm until about 3:30 a.m., when all of them went dead at the same exact instant. Authorities investigated the incident, and I gave a statement about what I'd seen, at least as accurate of a statement as I could, under the circumstances. The whole thing was written off as a wild animal attack, and once the dust settled, the whole team was let go, fired for our inaction during the event. Not that I ever wanted to go back there again anyways. I'll never forget what happened that day, and what the guards said about them showing up when you talk about them. So be careful if you hear this read aloud, because they just might have heard you speak their name, and they always show up when you talk about them. The Skinwalker Who Haunts Me, from R. The year was 2008. I was down on my luck after I found myself on the receiving end of company layoffs due to the recession. For the first time in 8 years, I was helplessly lost. The 26-year-old man who moved to Phoenix with the promises of becoming a household name in the real estate business was now a shell of his former self. Unemployed, not married, with only a 2-bedroom condo and a 1995 Toyota pickup truck to show for all my hard work. My dad had run out on my mom and I back when I was 6, so I have very few memories of him. My mom, now consumed by an alcohol-triggered early onset of Alzheimer's, was really the only family I had left, and hardly someone I could lean on in my times of trouble. Growing up, I had a proclivity towards the literature of Jack London and Hemingway. relating to them through their stories of men who had no home to which they could point their compass. I spent the next year working jobs from restaurants and bars to ranch hand. All the while I was saving as much as I could for my escape to free living. This is where the second chapter of my life would begin. I had found buyers for my condo and car. I figured they would only tie me down and I could use the money for more essential items. I scoured Craigslist for supplies, buying a tent, sleeping bag, and other necessities like a buck knife and small camping equipment. I finally took the plunge and became a vagabond in December of 2009. From Phoenix, I set off north to Sedona. I hitchhiked my way up the 17, a bit off track pulling into Payson. My companion was a trucker running late for his delivery. We arrived early the next morning around 6 a.m. at a rest stop. I thanked my friend for the lift, setting off on foot onto the trails headed north to Sedona. That day was the first of many where I can say I truly felt at peace. That crisp mountain air combined with the scent of pine and spruce calls you back and makes you wonder what it was like for the pioneers first discovering the West. That night was particularly cold, temperatures dipping below 20 degrees. That whole night, I contemplated my decision to go rogue at the ripe age of 31. I also discovered that some things in the Arizona wilderness just don't make sense to people living in modern society. That night, time moved slower than usual, each minute seemingly taking hours, and the perception of reality became foggy, as if I'd already forgotten what it was like to sleep in a warm bed, enclosed by walls. All night I heard every twig crack, leaf rustle, and each beat of my heart. I woke the next morning to a cold breeze, instantly realizing that the rain guard for my tent had blown off. I located it, caught on the branch of a fallen tree about 50 feet from where I set up camp. Going over to retrieve it, I noticed human footprints in the soft earth. They weren't boot prints or resembling any footwear. Rather, whoever had made them was completely barefoot. I was in the middle of going back through where I'd walked the previous day into the campsite, knowing full well I never took my boots off until I got into my tent, when I remembered how cold it had gotten that night. Nobody could survive such a cold night without some type of protection from the elements, and I was left wondering what or who could have left these. Over the next 3 days, I continued north, following a map and sticking within a reasonable distance of the freeway to use as a barring. The second night, I treated myself to a can of SpaghettiOs next to a warm fire and settled in for the night. Sometime around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps. Something was moving slowly as if it was trying to avoid detection. I sat there for a minute, wondering what or who it was, and what my next course of action would be. I'd surely die without my shelter, food, and water. But every instinct was telling me to run. My fire was nearly dead, only glowing embers remaining, when I heard the sound of crackling logs and the glow of a roaring fire. I was paralyzed by fear, and after an hour of sitting there, dead quiet, found myself uncontrollably drifting off. The next morning, I found all my gear completely untouched with the fire still going. A calming wave came over me because I figured it was another weary traveler, less fortunate than I to have a tent and sleeping bag. That was, of course, until I noticed the footprints. They were the same distinct barefoot tracks I'd seen the previous day, 20 miles from where I'd been. I quickly packed up and left a can of beans in the hopes that whoever was following me would recognize the kind gesture and leave me unharmed. Making my way back to the road, I caught a lift to Sedona where I treated myself to some tacos and cheap beer. I splurged and bought a cheap motel room to take a shower and feel human again, if even only for a while. I spent the next month exploring the local wilderness and getting a better lay of the land, picking up valuable information from fellow vagabonds who were more experienced. One night, I woke to the same sound I had heard back in Payson. Checking the time, I felt my heart sink, realizing it was 1 a.m. This time, however, there was no tending to the fire or an unexplained comfort. I found myself wrapped up in my tent, being dragged across the cold, rocky ground. Whoever or whatever was dragging me had removed the stakes holding down my tent and had wrapped the material around me in such a way that made it difficult to move my arms. I knew I had to act quick, remembering something I'd read years ago about escaping from being tied up. I tensed and wiggled my arms enough to get some room to reach my knife in my pocket. From there, I was able to cut the material constricting my body and eventually plunging the knife through the bottom of the tent, allowing me to fall out of my future body bag. I didn't look at who had taken me, running as fast as possible back towards the glow of my fire. I sat there for a minute listening for anything that resembled footsteps. Quickly packing up my gear, I noticed prints in the dirt in the direction in which I was dragged. This time, the only prints I saw were hoof prints. Not those made by a horse or cow, but more resembling a goat. I decided to stand my ground until dawn, and let me tell you, it was the worst night I ever had. It's been years since this encounter, and I'm still on the trails, taking seasonal jobs in Northern California. I spend most of my nights at a local campground, within an earshot of other weary-eyed travelers like myself. Most evenings, we sit and talk about our lives and what led us to abandon normal society. I've gotten to know basically the whole community, and really appreciate having neighbors for the first time in a while. I'll be moving soon, though, because every morning surrounding my tent are the footprints of a barefoot person, and my fire always seems to still be lit. I'm not particularly superstitious, but whatever is following me seems to take the skin of a human walking barefoot. A true story from my childhood that made me believe in skinwalkers. From entertainer No. 5745. A lot of strange things happened to me when I was just a boy, but this was the weirdest. I was 11 at the time. It was past midnight, 12:30 a.m. to be exact. My parents were asleep, but my cousin, who was 18 at the time, was still up. I had to take out the trash, so I brought my dog Barry with me. He was mostly black with a few white spots, always alert and always by my side. The trash can was only a 30-second walk from the front door. I tossed the bag in, then turned around and called for Barry, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no tags jingling, just silence. I turned on my flashlight and looked around. He wasn't there. Confused, I started walking back toward the house. That's when I heard it, heavy, fast, pounding footsteps coming up behind me. I whipped around and saw something I'll never forget. Charging at me was something completely black, darker than the night around it, like it absorbed light itself. A massive black figure running straight at me. It wasn't a dog or a pig or a horse, but somehow it looked like all three. Its body was wrong, just wrong. Its movement too fast, too heavy. It made no sound except for the thunder of its steps. No matter how fast I ran, it always felt like it was 2 steps behind me. This feeling of dread and fear instantly shot through me as I sprinted to the door. Heart racing, flung it open, and slammed it shut behind me. I sat there on the floor, gasping, trying to process what just happened. Then it hit me. Oh shoot, I left Barry outside. I start crying as I think of what that thing could have done to my innocent dog. I was scared to death, but I couldn't leave him out there. So I stood up, ready to go back out to find him, heart racing, until Barry came walking toward me from his kennel inside the house. Inside, calm and normal. He had never left the house. He was inside the whole time. Whatever I called to out there, it wasn't my dog. A true skinwalker story. Brief intro, I am from the Navajo Reservation, so this story is a first-hand account when I was junior high. Names have been changed for privacy. My cousin Todd and my friend Jordan decided to sleep over on a weekend. My brother Sherman and I decided we would all sleep inside a tent just outside our house, in one area that was fairly dark and away from the porch light beam. The land was dark, with no moonlight, billions of stars shimmering in the sky, and the Milky Way as beautiful as ever. We stayed up late telling stories and jokes. I want to say it was around 1 to 2 a.m. when we were about to go to sleep. Next thing we knew, we hear a coyote, or what sounded like a howling dog of some sort, coming from south of our family's horse corral. We didn't mind it because there are usually strays or coyotes that roam around at night in search of food. But then, we hear something hitting the ground, like rocks, and 1 or 2 hit the tent. We get quiet and whisper to each other. Then we hear footsteps that seem not too far from the tent. We are armed with knives and flashlights as we decide to open the tent and see what it could be. Rocks are still flying. You can hear it hit nearby. We shine our flashlights toward where we think the howling and footsteps came from. And in a split second, Cousin Todd sees something run left behind the horse corral and decides to run after it. Sherman follows Todd as Jordan and I decide to cut it off on the left of the corral. We see Todd running toward the cornfield fence line, which is about 30 to 40 yards left of the corral. We run toward him, and when we get near, we ask, "What happened? Did you see anything?" He answers, "No," and runs into the dark cornfield. Before we could yell, "Where are you going?" Todd and Sherman come from behind us. They ask us if we seen anything because they lost whatever they were chasing. Jordan and I look at each other before we tell them what we saw. We headed back to the tent and went to sleep. We weren't bothered again that night. We all came to the conclusion that it was a skinwalker that answered us. He wore the same color shirt as Todd and sounded just like him. They have the ability to shapeshift, not only into animals, but into other people. That was my first and last encounter. My friend was replaced by a skinwalker from the rot. About 15 years ago, my longtime childhood friend Josh and I decided we were going to go camping in September. We lived in California, so the weather was pretty good year-round. Josh and I were always getting into trouble for doing stupid things that we had no right to be doing, such as putting Mentos in Coke bottles behind the grocery store, skipping school to hang out by the river, going to the park late at night and yelling like coyotes, things like that. We were both 17 at the time, and only Josh had his license. Both of our parents were pretty protective, so there was no way they were going to let us go camping just by ourselves without any adult supervision. So we both lied to our parents and said we were going to stay the night at each other's houses. Josh picked me up from my house around 3 p.m., and we stopped at the grocery store to get a bunch of junk food for camping. After that, we waited for his dad to leave for work so we could sneak into his parents' garage and get the camping supplies. By the time we were done with all of this, we had gotten on the road about 4:30 p.m. The campsite was a fair distance away. Luckily, Josh had a tendency to speed, so he managed to get to the campgrounds around 6 p.m. When we arrived, we noticed that the entrance parking lot was pretty empty. In the vast space, there was just another car, as well as the park ranger's truck. We headed up to the front booth and asked the woman who was attending it which campsites were available. She let us know that out of about 60 sites, only one was taken, and it was at the other end of the park. Josh and I knew we were going to be loud and make a bunch of noise, so we decided to take the campsite on the opposite end. The way that this campground was set up was that you had to park your car at the entrance of the state park and then haul your camping gear to your campsite. We didn't bring a wagon, so we had to make a couple of trips to bring the tent, sleeping bags, our cooler, and groceries. To save time on the last trip to the car, I told Josh to start setting up the tent and that I would go back to the car to bring the last 2 bags of groceries and lock up the car. It was quite a ways away, about 10 minutes to get to the car and back. I was starting to think that picking a camping spot at the far end of the park was a dumb idea. The sun had already started to set when I was walking back. I kept hearing pine cones and small twigs fall from the trees, as well as the sounds of squirrels and chipmunks running through the bushes. It's funny that even in a state park, you feel as if at any moment you can be ambushed by a bear or a mountain lion. At least that is what I thought. I was pretty much on edge the whole way back to camp because of how dim the tall pine trees made the forest path. When I arrived, Josh was about halfway done setting up the tent and said I should probably start on the fire. Otherwise, we were going to have a rough time looking around camp. By the time he had got the tent set up and I had got the fire started, the sun had completely gone down, and now only our little campfire was lighting our surroundings. "Dude, I told you we were going to need flashlights," I said to Josh. "Well, I thought we were going to be able to bring our car to the campsite, so I didn't think it was going to take us until night to set up. My bad," he said. "We had enough firewood to last us the whole night with no problem. But we wanted to be very cautious with the amount of firewood we used, so it would last the whole night. Because of this, we decided we should probably eat dinner early so we wouldn't be hungry late in the night." I threw a couple of logs on the fire and broke out a package of hot dogs and buns from the cooler. "How many do you want?" I said to Josh. "Could you cook me 3? I'm going to go to the restroom, but I'll be right back," he said. "Yeah, sure, no problem. Do you want me to leave you out the mustard or ketchup?" "Just mustard is fine." Josh turned his flash on his phone and then started to walk towards the restrooms, which were located in the center of the park. As I put the hot dogs on the skewers, I watched Josh and his phone light fade off into the dark forest along with the sound of his footsteps. And then that feeling, that same uneasy feeling that there was a predator of the forest watching me, came to my head. I propped up the skewers on the picnic table and threw a couple of large dry logs on the fire so I would have some extra light in the area. The fire now crackled bright and healthy. I could see in all directions very clearly, and I started to feel a little safer and at ease. I continued to cook the hot dogs and prepared my food to eat. I went to open YouTube on my phone so I could have some music or some video playing while I ate, but up here in the mountains there was no signal at all. So instead, I just ate along the sound of the fire roaring. After some time, I began to notice that Josh had been gone for quite a while now, which didn't worry me too much. I thought that he might have been going number 2. But his food was beginning to get cold. I was about to get ready to turn my phone flash on and start walking towards the restrooms to see what was taking him so long. Just then, he came walking back into camp from the silhouette of the forest. "Dude, you scared the crap out of me," I said, startled. "I didn't hear you or see your phone flashlight at all. Your hot dogs are on the picnic table, but they're probably cold and need to be heated up." He looked at the plate of hot dogs and then at me, and then at the plate of hot dogs again, and sat down at the other end of the table, away from his food. "Are you okay? Did you have hemorrhoids or something?" I joked. He didn't say anything. He just looked into the fire. "Okay, weirdo. Well, I'm gonna go use the restroom, but I'll be back in a bit." "Sleep," he said. "What, it's only like 9:30. "Sleep," he said again, this time more forcefully. "Dude, shut up and eat your hot dogs and stop being weird." He stood up from the bench and walked inside of the tent. I heard some rustling, and then it stopped abruptly. Assuming he was trying to play some kind of a weird act or joke, I turned the flash on my phone and started walking towards the restrooms. It was very hard to see any path or trail, just a faint yellow light in the distance from the street light in the parking lot entrance. I felt I was about halfway there when I tripped over a log and dropped my phone. "Fuck," I said under my breath. I started to feel around the ground blindly, searching for my phone. My hands were scraping around all of the dried pine needles and dirt in an outwards fanning motion until finally my hand met something warm. I thought it was a skunk or a possum, so I flinched back and stood still, trying to force my eyes to adjust to what was around me. I could faintly see a small white light on the ground to my left. It was coming from my phone, being camera side down in a bed of pine needles. I picked it up and looked around where I'd fallen. What I thought was a small woodland creature was actually the arm of my friend Josh. Attached to it was a lifeless body on the ground of pine needles, his empty, lifeless eyes staring at me. His stomach and his intestines had been completely eviscerated from his body, along with the rest of his organs. I could see his spine and his ribs, nothing else. I instantly thought he had been attacked by a mountain lion. But even then, who the hell? Or what the hell was in the tent back at the campsite? My head was spinning. It suddenly felt like I had electricity running down my neck. I felt nauseous and sick, like I was about to throw up and faint at the same time. There was such a loud ringing in my ears, but I was still able to hear a voice in my head saying, "Run, get out of there, run, move, come on, run, get out of there, move," over and over again. It seemed like I would never become unfrozen. Thankfully, my body automatically did a 180 and I started running towards the entrance parking lot. Josh's car keys bounced erratically in my pants pocket, and I had a death grip on my phone. I was running so fast through the forest that all I could hear was the screaming of the wind in my ears. "Run, get out of there, run, move, come on, run, get out of there, move." I kept hearing it over and over in my head, knowing that if I stopped, I could end up like Josh. I felt every creature in the forest watching me, like the earth beneath me was trying to swallow me whole. Every tree was trying to block me. The forest had now turned into my enemy. For a moment, I thought I was going to lose my mind until at last I'd reached the edge of the parking lot. I ran down the gravel road and all the way up to Josh's car. I got in lightning fast, locked the door, quickly started the car, and floored it. As I was nearing the exit, I noticed the park ranger's truck was gone and that the lady who had been attending the entrance booth had left for the night. I turned on the main road and tried calling 911 from my phone, but there was absolutely no signal. I drove about 25 minutes to get to the nearest gas station and parked my deceased friend's car right up to the entrance. Once I ran inside, I told the cashier I needed to use their landline phone to call the cops. When the police had got there, I gave them my story. They thought I was just some dumb kid who was acting out and gave me a breathalyzer test, which I passed. It was concerning to them that I was driving Josh's car this far away from home without Josh and saw that I had a state park pass on the dashboard. Because of this, they did send a couple of cars up to the park to look for Josh. When they got to the park, they looked around for a body or signs of a struggle or someone in the tent. Theirs was nothing. They questioned the other campers that had been on the other side of the park, whether they had heard anything that night, whether they heard fighting or gunshots, and they said no. They soon had bloodhounds search the area, and no one and no animal could find a trace of Josh. He was just gone. My childhood friend of 10 years was taken by something that night, and I will never know what the hell it was. To this day, whenever I am driving on the road and I pass by a dense collection of trees, that feeling of being watched comes back to me. But it is not bears or mountain lions that I am afraid of anymore. I was a park ranger at a national park. I regret it. It all started a few years ago. It was your run-of-the-mill boring shift at the office. I worked the night shifts and our staff was pretty small, so there was usually only one or two other rangers working with me. But on this specific night, I was alone. I yawned and looked at the clock. It read 3 a.m., only a few hours to go. Suddenly, I heard a branch crack outside. Like the paranoid person I was, I instantly tensed up and began to slightly panic. "You're being crazy. It's just an animal or something." My paranoia returned twofold once I heard another branch breaking. I knew it was most likely nothing, but I got up and made sure the door was locked, and then I looked out the window, scanning the area for anything suspicious. I took a deep sigh of relief when the answer was affirmative. Upon sitting down, I swore I could hear the faintest footsteps coming from outside the office. So faint that they could have been in the back of my mind. But then they grew louder, and there was no doubt that they were real. The footsteps seemed to be getting louder and closer by the second, and they sounded like no normal animals or humans. I tried to distract myself by playing some games on my computer, but the paranoia was becoming too much to ignore. I jumped when I heard the horrific sound of screeching nails on one of the back office windows. I got up and quickly made my way to the window, only to find a long red scratch mark. My stomach threatened to empty itself at the sight. Usually I like being alone at the night shift, but at this moment I wished I had another coworker with me. I heard another scratching noise, this time coming from the window closest to my desk. I ran out of the room and watched as 5 terrifying nails slowly scratched their way down the window, leaving the same red mark. I spent the next half hour sitting in my chair, shaking and teeming with intense anxiety, hearing the scratching sound every so often. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and looked at the first window. It was totally and utterly covered with red scratch marks. There was absolutely no seeing out of that window. I checked every other window, and it was the same for all of them. I sat back down and looked at the clock. It was now 4 a.m., meaning there was only around an hour until dawn. If I can just wait for the morning shift to arrive, I should be okay. I knew I needed to make myself as comfortable as possible in such a situation. I went to each window and closed the curtains. I then settled down in my chair and tried to distract myself with some random news articles, really the only entertainment I could access on the work computers. I shot up in my seat when I heard a horrific scream coming not too far from the office. I got out of my seat and made sure I had my firearm handy. I walked over to the front and tried to look out the window, examining the surrounding areas. The scream had sounded like someone was in trouble or deeply fearful. I opened the door and embraced the chilly air before venturing into the outside world. I locked the door behind me and clicked on my flashlight and slowly scanned the surrounding area, finding nothing. "Is anyone out here?" I called out. I was met with the same horrific scream as my response, this time sounding much closer. The scream caused me to jump, and my nerves were filled with paranoia. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out shakily. "Help!" I heard an uncanny voice shriek, sending me into a panicked daze. I continued to scan the area with my flashlight, desperately hoping to see what was making these terrifying screams. The hairs on my neck stood up when I felt the gut-wrenching sensation of being breathed upon. I turned around and aimed my flashlight directly behind me, illuminating the cruel imitation of a woman staring right at me. After the initial shock subsided, I booked it back to the ranger's office. I pulled out my set of keys and tried to find the one that would unlock the door, but it wasn't there. I turned around and was met with the scene of the skinwalker tauntingly dangling the key I needed in front of me. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I ran to the side of the office and began to relentlessly pound on the glass window. But it just wouldn't break. I looked behind me once more and saw the skinwalker was now a dozen paces closer. I involuntarily screamed from pure fear and booked it into the forest, not caring where I was going, only caring about putting as much distance between me and this horrific creature as possible. While running, I pulled out my cell phone and crashed when I saw it had no service. I then pulled out my radio and tried to call for backup, but my only response was static. After running for a while, my body gave out from exhaustion. As I lay on the forest ground, pushing as many deep lungfuls of oxygen I could into my lungs, I scanned the area, looking for any sign of the skinwalker. Once I locked eyes with the two eyes staring at me from behind a tree. Adrenaline took over and I was suddenly able to run again. I knew just how long the forest stretched. It would take me a long time to reach the end, and even when I did, it wasn't like anyone would be there waiting to help me. "Please help me," the creature shrieked. Something about its voice was incredibly distressing and inhuman. I picked up my pace twofold, not caring about how scratched up I would be from all the branches and whatnot I was running into at full speed. I tripped over a branch and screamed in pain as my face impacted the ground. I scurried onto my feet and noticed my flashlight was no longer on. I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the sound of the footsteps getting closer and closer. I felt the flashlight and realized that one of the batteries had fallen out during my fall. I bent down and panickedly felt the ground near me, desperately hoping to come across the battery I needed for my most important sense: sight. I decided to cut my losses and leave the flashlight when the footsteps had become too close to ignore. I was now briskly walking through the forest instead of running, my arms out in front of me to feel what was ahead of me. After a long time of venturing in the forest, I had finally made it out. I looked at the dimly moonlit river beneath me, feeling the tiniest bit safer. The tiny sense of safety I felt was ripped away from me once I heard the footsteps. I climbed down and began to run on the river's beach. My body kept threatening to collapse from exhaustion, but I wouldn't let it. I looked behind me while I ran and could now see the skinwalker in greater detail. It had morphed from the uncanny woman into a four-legged beast, charging at me on all fours. I searched through my mind, trying to gather up all of the information I knew about skinwalkers. I had heard of the legends of a skinwalker roaming this park, but I always thought it was just a nonsense fairy tale. I remembered that a way to kill a skinwalker was to state its true identity to it. I now had an idea, but it fell very short. I had no clue what this creature's true identity was, and it was pretty clear I had no way of finding it in the near future. I looked up and felt a small glimpse of hope when I saw the light of the sun slowly creeping up above the mountains. I looked behind me and suddenly noticed that I couldn't see the creature following me anymore. I took a sigh of relief and slowed down my pace slightly, but I didn't dare stop running. I knew that the closest ranger's office was only an hour's walk away. I ran for a while longer and then slowed to a brisk walk due to the exhaustion I had put my body through. After a long and treacherous walk, I could see the other ranger's office in my sight, and the sun had now fully risen. I made it to the ranger's office and attempted to catch my breath. While banging on the door, I heard footsteps shuffle and come my way, and then the door opened, revealing another park ranger looking concerned. "Geez, are you all right?" he asked. "There's something in the woods, I said between ragged breaths. I know, the ranger calmly responded. What? I asked shakily. I said. The ranger started. I watched in complete horror as the ranger slowly morphed into the creature I was familiar with. Before he fully morphed, I took one last look at his badge. His name read, Apache Sioux. I know. The creature finished, its voice now heavily distorted. I instantly bolted to the river behind me and the creature followed. I didn't know if I could run much longer without passing out. Suddenly I realized that the name on his badge would be a good guess to his true identity. I decided to take the risk. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Apache Sioux. The creature suddenly seemed startled, and it began to retreat. Apache Sioux, I screamed even louder, causing the creature to run away. I began to roar out in maniacal laughter. I had won, or so I thought. Out of nowhere, I heard the deafening sound of what sounded like dozens of thousands of gut-wrenching screams at once. I felt my ears as they throbbed in pain. I heard the sound of trees rustling, and I turned to see the most panic-inducing scene of hundreds of skinwalkers and wendigos running out of all directions of the forest, charging at me. I screamed and ran into the ranger's office, closing and locking the door behind me. I sat down in the chair and began to hyperventilate when the creature started relentlessly banging on all sides of the office. It seemed like no end was near except the end of my life. Shit, I screamed in a frustrated and fearful tone. The skinwalkers and wendigos began to tear down pieces of the building one by one, causing me to slowly retreat into the center of the room until the building was almost entirely destroyed. The next few minutes were a horror-filled daze. The creatures were slowly removing the last pieces of building, as if to taunt me. I swear I even heard a few of them snicker. I didn't know much about these legendary creatures, so I figured it would be a good idea to commit the most destructive act I could think of. A fire. As a park ranger, I had some decent experience of knowing how to make a fire with nothing except a rock and steel. I began to search through what was left of the office, and a pocket knife, oh so tantalizing, caught my eye. I ran for the pocket knife, but the creatures must have known what I was attempting, so they jumped off and attacked me. It was pure agony, and I literally felt like I had been transported to hell. Each of the creatures mercilessly tortured me, but my brain blocked out the pain the best it could and focused on the one thing that mattered in that moment, creating a fire. I grabbed the pocket knife, flipped it open, and rubbed a rock against it. I saw sparks forming, and my eyes widened with hope. I tried and tried again, until eventually one of the sparks caught the wood, and fire began to slowly but surely envelope the building. The creatures all shrieked and slowly retreated from the growing flame, and so did I. Some of the creatures had already been caught in the fire, and were too far gone already. Only a handful survived, and they all decided to run into the forest. I pressed my radio and explained that a fire had erupted and that it was spreading fast. I ran down to the river, thinking it would give me the best chance of protection from this fire. I jumped into the river and struggled immensely as the current tried to pull me into its wrath. But I swam and swam until I was on the other side. I collapsed on the ground and took in deep lungfuls of oxygen, feeling victorious but also defeated at the same time. I looked back and saw that my radio was floating down the heavy current. I cursed at myself and got up. I decided to cut my losses and move on. I needed to find the nearest ranger office to alert them of the fire before it got too bad. I walked into the forest and was instantly enveloped with paranoia. I felt like I was being watched with a million taunting eyes. waiting for me with pure rage after what I had just done. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, examining every single piece of every tree, trying to ease my paranoia. Just as I was about to let my guard down, I saw two unblinking and menacing eyes staring directly at me from behind a tree. At first, I froze in complete fear and shock, but just as soon after I was running for my life once again, giving me a strong sense of unpleasant déjà vu. I didn't know much about this part of the park, but I assumed this forest didn't go on for that long. After hours of walking, I'd proven my assumption incorrect. This forest seemed to be going on forever, and I could smell the nasty smell of smoke growing more pungent. Finally, I noticed the trees becoming less close to each other, and before I knew it, I was out of the forest. I made it to the office and explained the fire situation to the officers there, but not bothering to explain the skinwalker situation to them. I knew they would just think it was insane nonsense. Anyways, I eventually made it home safely, but I quit my job very shortly after that, and I still have nightmares about those creatures to this day. Why I quit my job as a park ranger. Hello, everybody. My name is Denver Dark. I'm 19 years old, fresh out of high school, working as a park ranger at Caledon State Park in Virginia. My job is pretty easy. I don't usually patrol the park. My job is to sit in a radio room and wait for people to call in if they need assistance. This can range from someone needing the bathroom door unlocked to a drunken fight. A couple of months ago, though, I had an encounter with some type of creature, or maybe even an alien, I'm not sure at this point. This forever scarred me, and I will always be paranoid of the forest. It was a normal evening at the park. I looked over at the clock on my desk as it clicked over to 6 p.m. Well, here goes to another night by myself, I said out loud as I saw all of the other park rangers packing up to leave. Another hour passed, and as I was eating my dinner, static started coming through the radio. After a couple of seconds of just the static, a girl's voice started to come through. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? I paused for a second after chewing another bite of my food. I'd never heard anything like this over the radio before, so I picked it up. Hello, this is Officer Dark here. Yes, she yelled before continuing her sentence. Please help me. Something is chasing me. I was dumbfounded. The creepy part was she didn't say someone. She said something. I quickly calmed myself before responding. Calm down, miss. Tell me where you are so I can send help out immediately. I'm at the old watchtower on the northeast side of the park. I ran here after it chased me out of my cabin. Please send help. I think it's close. It's all right, miss. I'll send help out immediately. I was cut off by her. Shh. I stopped talking, listening to the radio. Then I heard a very soft but aggressive growl come from the speaker. Oh God, it's here. As she finished her sentence, I heard a crash of a window and a large thud on a wood floor. The radio cut out. I was in complete shock. Did I just witness someone die? After about a minute of me being absolutely glued to my seat with terror, I started to gather a plan in my head. I spun around in my chair and grabbed the old park map off of the desk next to me. I unfolded it, frantically scanning it, looking for an old watchtower. There it was on the northeast side of the park, just like she said. To the looks of it, it would take me about an hour to walk there. I got up from my chair and walked over to the gun cabinet, unlocking it with the keys I had in my pocket. I grabbed the first gun I saw, a 12-gauge shotgun along with some extra shells. I also saw the flare gun on the top shelf and decided to take that too. Before leaving the station, I made sure that I had everything that I needed. Shotgun, flare gun, flashlight, radio, pocket knife, and the map. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared to go out into the woods after that whole event. I also hated the idea of being alone, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. As I exited the station, I was greeted by the cool breeze and a beautiful sunset of a summer evening. All of the night bugs and animals started to come out. I could hear the call-in of the cicadas in the trees, while the crickets buzzed below them on the ground. It's weird because you wouldn't think that such a breathtaking scene could hold such horror that the lady experienced. Since it was a long walk, I started moving at a faster pace than I normally would. As I was about 10 minutes away from the tower, everything changed. Once an amazing sunset now turned the forest into a pitch black that no person could see into, along with the deafening sound of silence as the cicadas and crickets stopped chatting. This was extremely odd. I'd been in this forest many times at night, and nothing like this had ever happened. A few more minutes of walking later, and I saw the old watchtower. It was about 70 feet tall or so, with a hut at the top of it. The watchtower had seen its better days. The wood looked very old, with it being damp and cracked in many spots. At this point, I was at the base of the tower. Right before I was about to go up on the first step, I got the worst feeling I have ever felt. My head started to spin. I was very nauseous and started to see stars. As this continued, I thought I was going to pass out. As the darkness around my eyeballs started to grow, everything stopped. I was normal again. Except for one feeling, it felt like something was staring at me. I swear I could feel its eyes piercing into the back of my head. Its glare almost felt sharp, like a knife had been jammed into my side. I spun around as quickly as I could, holding the shotgun in front of me. Nothing. There's nothing, I thought. Until I scanned the tree line in front of me about 50 or so feet out. Oh my gosh, I let out as I see deep in the forest. A pair of two vibrant green eyes staring at me. I was struck with fear. My eyes not being able to leave the sight, my feet almost cemented in the ground. After about a minute of me staring at it, it winked at me. It winked at me. After this, the eyes disappeared and went back into the brush. I didn't know what to think. The only thing that I knew was not to stay in that spot. I ran up the old wooden stairs as fast as I could. But then I remembered the radio call I'd gotten earlier. I prepared myself for a bloody scene. But when I reached the top of the steps, the hut was empty. No blood, no body, no lady. The most disturbing thing of all, though, was it looked like this place hasn't been touched in years. The floors and desk in the room were both completely covered in cobwebs and dust. A large radio sat on the desk. It must have been the one that came through to mine. But that too was engulfed by the webs. Something very strange is happening. I just couldn't figure it out. On the edge of the desk was a stack of very old newspapers. My curiosity took over and I picked one up. Date, 1978. Headline, Woman attacked and killed by the Wampus cat, locals say. This didn't make any sense. This couldn't be the same lady I just contacted. I needed to find out more, so I kept on reading. The next thing that I read sent shivers down my spine. The Wampus cat resembles a very large black panther, most known for their very bright green eyes. My blood ran cold. I needed to get out of this place right now, right as I shoved the newspaper into my pocket and was ready to run. It was too late. Before I could turn around, I heard a sound. That same damn bone-chilling growl I had heard on the radio. I turned around as fast as I could, raising my shotgun. There it was, the beast itself. The Wampus cat. This cat was massive. quite possibly the biggest mammal I had ever seen. It stood on all fours at a staggering height of at least 8 feet tall. It had deep old scars all over its body, probably from people like me. Its paws were the size of small dinner plates, and didn't forget its face. The lips were completely barred back, showing its dinner knife-like fangs. And the most important thing of all, those dang green eyes, almost staring into my soul. I didn't waste any time and pulled the trigger, sending a slug at my target. I landed the shot, but it barely did anything. The cat staggered back when the slug hit him. But that's about it. How is this thing still alive? The round had left a bloody hole in its torso about the size of a dollar coin. But alas, the creature was pretty much unfazed. I decided to run for it, booking it to the exit, only to be stopped by the huge feline pouncing on my back and pinning me to the wood floor. The beast raked its long claws across my back, leaving an extremely painful wound. It felt like I was being burned with a hot iron. I could feel my shirt already being soaked with blood. I managed to flip around on my back to face the beast, holding its head away from my face. Although I was able to keep its head at bay, I wasn't with the paws. It started swiping at my face, leaving those searing claw marks on me again. I tried to reach for the shotgun on the ground next to me, but I wasn't able to. Blood from the gashes started to seep into my eyes, stinging them, not allowing me to see. With nothing working and all of the blood I was losing, I started to give up. There was no point, I couldn't overpower this thing. And right when I was about to give in, thinking about all of my friends and the family, an idea sparked into my head. I reached in my pocket and pulled out the knife I'd forgotten about. I flipped the blade open and immediately stabbed the cat in the neck with it. The beast reared back in pain, leaping off of me. This was my only chance to escape. I quickly got up and snatched the shotgun before sprinting down the stairs. I had a head start, but the cat was catching up. As I reached the bottom, it was already halfway down. I didn't have any time to spare. I ran immediately to the trails, not looking behind me. I could hear the big, heavy footsteps of the beast on my tail end. I knew eventually it was going to catch up, so I turned around, pumping 2 more slugs in it, staggering it again. I could tell it was hurt, because it was moving a lot slower. I fired again in its direction, landing another shot with a bloody splat. Then the cat stopped running, turning around and slowly jogging the other direction. It finally gave up. This didn't stop me from sprinting back to the station. I used every bit of strength and willpower to make it back. As I busted through the door of the building, the biggest wave of relief came over me. I had won. I had beaten that thing. After attending to my wounds and grabbing a glass of water, I sat down in my desk chair, thankful to be alive. While reaching into my pocket to take out my phone, I felt paper. The newspaper. I pulled it out, scanning the article once again, realizing that I missed something before. The woman's body was found in the watchtower of Caledon State Park, her body being mutilated, even missing some of her limbs. Even though she was killed, many of the people in the park say they can still hear her calling for help, just like that same night she was murdered. I was completely shook. I didn't know what to think. Was it a ghost or maybe a spirit? And right as I put the newspaper down, and the radio buzzed, playing that same voice that started this all. Hello. Do not visit rural Appalachia. From unknown. For starters, this is off the record. I wasn't here. I will give a fake name. I will give fake locations. If anyone tries to contact me, I will do what I have to protect my family. This is a warning, nothing more. Do not travel to rural Appalachia. My name is Deepu. Well, it's Hoover. I'm a former sheriff's deputy. I'm 29 years old, and I'm already retired with a full pension. It's hush money, really. I'm putting my family and livelihood at risk by posting this, but I can't stomach the thought of some dipshit city slicker going to those mountains and it happening to them. Was a deputy for Unicoi County, Tennessee. It's a gorgeous place. Watching that sunrise over the mountains was an almost spiritual event. I never thought I would leave until it happened. It happened the fall of last year. Strange because I remember it was particularly crisp, beautiful autumn. The leaves had changed and the entire valley was surrounded by an enchanting sea, awash with reds and hues of orange. I was at the station filling out some paperwork and drinking my evening coffee with Richards, my partner. He was a good guy. New in town as he and his family had just moved from Montgomery, and I took him under my wing. He was kind of deputy who stick his neck out for you. He didn't mind putting in the extra hours so you could leave early. He was my best friend. Around 7 and we got a call for a 130 code for a dead body up the mountain in a campsite. That's not particularly surprising. Unicoi is well known for its population of bears and bobcats. It typically would happen once or twice a year that some hotshot yuppie would come in with 10 grand of worth of equipment and get mauled by a predator while cooking. When we got to the campsite, I'm pretty embarrassed to say, my first thought was to give whoever it was a little bit of credit. They picked an amazing spot with a view over the entire valley. But then I saw them. There wasn't one body, there was 5. 1 adult man and 1 female with 3 little girls. The man was leaned up against a tree next to their tent. His head was so slashed to hell I could see chunks of skull jutting out of the mound that was his face. The woman didn't fare much better. She was shredded. Her torso and head was about 3 feet from the tent, with some jumbled mush I imagine was probably her legs laying a few yards away. It was sickening, and the hardest part of the job. But I didn't realize this was something else until we found the girls about 100 yards away. They were stacked, well, what was left of them, neatly on a rock down the slope of the mountain. Their organs and dismembered body parts painted the boulder red with still drying blood. Deputy Davis, who made the call, was nowhere to be found. It was getting dark, the kind of suffocating darkness that swallows you and doesn't let you breathe. What or who ever did this was still out here. I told Richards we needed to get back to the truck and call in backup and a rescue team to look for Davis. As Richards and I started back up the slope, I saw it. Sitting on a branch of an old oak tree near him was a woman, or what I thought was a woman, with gray cold skin and a sinister crooked smile. Before I could even speak, she had already pounced savagely, screaming and slashing with her demon-like talon that forked unnaturally from her hand. I drew my service pistol and fired 8 times in a tight cluster in her side. She didn't even so much as pause her rampage. I think it's Richard's screams that haunt me the most. His whimpered howls reminded me of a coyote caught in a trap an animal who knows it's about to die. I could see the tears streaming down his blood and sweat-soaked face. His eyes were bloodshot and bulging. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even process what I was seeing. Some sort of demon from hell itself who came to slaughter. Something unnatural. She finally stopped and turned towards me. When I became a deputy, I knew that I could die on duty, but I couldn't fathom it was be from something like this. I'm ashamed to admit at that moment I had accepted my death. I turned my service pistol at my head and was about to pull the trigger to avoid a fate like Richard's when she was just gone. Like that. Like mist in the air, leaving me alone with the corpse of my closest friend on the slope of the mountain. As I carried his bloodied carcass up of the mountain to the truck, all I could see was that scene in my head. It seared into my mind. When I called for backup instead of the sheriff's office, several large black vans showed up filled with unidentified men in suits. I was told to quit my job, move, and to never speak of what happened, and I would receive a hefty retirement package. I took the deal. I don't know why she didn't kill me. It haunts me. I can't sleep. I can't eat. All I see is her ripping apart Richards. The day before I left, I spoke with some Cherokee elders, and they told me it was something they call Atlunta, a demon who stalks the Appalachians hunting her prey. Whatever it was, I'm begging whoever reads this don't go visit the Appalachia Mountains. It's not worth it. Don't let her get you too. My brother left to hike the Appalachian Mountains. What came back isn't him. From D. My brother, Kevin, not his real name, I am trying to keep some anonymity, has always been outdoorsy. Growing up, he would wander off into the woods behind my parents' property and stay out there for hours. He said that being out in nature brought him a lot of peace. A few months ago, things kind of spiraled for him. He lost his girlfriend, his job, and his apartment within 6 weeks. He ended up moving back home with me and my parents to try and get back on his feet. It was hard to see him like that. I mean, he was never someone I would describe as an eternal optimist. But that little spark he always had was gone. This past spring, I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the middle of the night. He was picking apart a piece of cold pizza, and it was the first time I had seen him almost eat something in days. I told him maybe he should get back out into nature, take some hikes, or maybe do a solo camping weekend. I said that I had noticed he had seemed down lately and maybe being out in the world could help me get back to himself. In the moment, I wasn't sure if he was really hearing me, but he took a bite of pizza, squeezed my hand, said he loved me, and went back to his bedroom. The next morning, he announced to my parents he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. My mom was hesitant, but Kevin told her that he knew enough about himself to know that sitting at home in his room was causing more stress than if he could go out and just be in the place that made him feel most at ease. My dad just said that as long as Kev checked in every few days or so, he didn't see a problem with it. My dad pointed out that it wasn't like Kevin didn't have the experience. He was a Boy Scout, turned Eagle Scout, turned camping enthusiast. People do that hike all the time, Kathleen. If it were dangerous, no one would be bragging about it. I remember him saying those words exactly. I don't know why they stuck in my head the way they did, but maybe it was the way Kevin seemed to brighten up a little bit after my dad gave his blessing in a sort of roundabout way. The next 2 weeks were spent helping my brother pack what he would need, registering his hike, and buying a plane ticket to Georgia, where he would start his trip. The night he left, our mom was a mess. She kept fussing over him as if he wasn't a full-grown man. She kept asking him if he had everything he needed, and he just kept assuring her he did and would check in with us once he got to Trailhead. Looking back now, he seemed genuinely excited. If I had known what would happen, I would never let him leave. My brother called like he said he would, just as he was beginning his trip. He even sent a photo in our family group chat that showed him up against a backdrop of purple-blue mountains and lush greenery. He had a thumbs up and his signature slightly off-center smirk. He wrote, "Finally made it. Love you guys. Talk when I get better reception. Over the next few days, Kevin would send a photo or video, usually of his surroundings, but occasionally he would send a selfie with the caption, "Proof of life." But as the days wore on, we stopped getting updates as frequently. What was a text at least once a day became a text once every 3 or 4 days. My dad blamed it on spotty cell reception, which made sense, and it wasn't as if the messages stopped altogether, and from what I could piece together from his photos and short text bursts, he was making good time. It was around a month and a half into his trip when we realized it had been almost 2 weeks without any communication from Kevin. We called the authorities. We gave them all the information that we had. But based on what we knew, it was hard to say he was even missing. As far as the police were concerned, he had gone off-grid with the intent of going off-grid. Sending out search and rescue would cost thousands of dollars, and it could be a waste of resources, especially if there was someone else who needed it. They said they would put a notice out to the ridge runners, and if they saw Kevin, they were told to tell him to contact us. My mom was furious, but I couldn't necessarily blame the cops for their response. We had no evidence to support that Kev was anything but content out in the wilderness. A few days later, a text came through, just a photo of sunset and the words, "Everything is okay here." That began the new normal of communication with my brother. There would be long stretches of time where we would hear nothing, just long enough for my mother to start panicking. And then we would get a blurry photo and a generic caption like, "Look what I saw today," or "Wish you were here." One night, while going through the photos he had sent, I realized in the background of every shot, from before we had called the police, was a black smudge. It was too blurry to properly make it out, and it didn't seem to be an animal or something caught moving in the camera lens. But after the first photo he had sent after we thought he was missing, the smudge was gone. Kevin came home earlier than expected. He also hadn't told anyone his plans. One night during dinner, there was a loud, sharp knock at the door. My dad got up to answer it, and there was Kevin. His hair was long and stringy. He had grown a patchy beard over his cheeks and jaw. His lips were dry and cracked, and his gums were coated in a dried layer of blood. He was rail thin. He had lost at least 30 pounds, and he wasn't a large man to begin with. His clothes were filthy, caked in mud and debris, and his shorts looked like they had been worn thin at the sole. My mother made a sound almost like a yelp and rushed over to him. The smell coming off him made me gag. It smelled like he had smeared rotting meat under his armpits. My dad just looked at him in shock. When he finally spoke, his voice was dry and raspy, as if he hadn't used it in weeks. "Mom." That was all he could say before he practically collapsed in her arms. I won't bore you guys with everything that happened after that. There was a lot of hugging, some tears, and then a very, very long shower. But something didn't feel right. Kev went to bed pretty much immediately after. He barely even looked at us. The next morning, he ate breakfast with a ferocity that made my skin crawl. He was gulping down huge mouthfuls of food, barely stopping to breathe. My mom just kept piling his plate with bacon, eggs, and toast. He stopped only after he had consumed a whole loaf of bread, 2 packages of bacon, and nearly 2 dozen eggs. I tried to ask him about the trip, tried to get him to say anything at all, really. But all I got were grunts and uh-huhs before he lumbered back off to his bedroom. The next few days were more the same. Kev eating an insane amount of food, sleeping for hours, and then mumbling his way through conversations. It took about a week for him to start communicating like a human being again. But even then it was stilted, awkward, unnatural. He's been home for almost a month now, and something isn't right. His voice, it changed somehow. It's still his voice, but it's like There is a second voice buried underneath it, like someone is trying to harmonize while he speaks. He lumbers around the house like his knees are locked in place, but he refuses to go to the doctors. The worst part is the smell. It still won't go away. No matter how often or how long he showers, he still reeks like death. I could have maybe ignored all of this, maybe blame it on being isolated in the woods for weeks. But after what happened tonight, I couldn't sleep. That feeling of fear in my stomach I felt ever since he's been back hasn't gone away. And honestly, it keeps me up most nights. I was trying to will myself to sleep when I heard the back door creak open. I crept out of my bedroom and down the hall. From my viewpoint, I could see into the kitchen through the window into the backyard. I saw my brother, perched on his hands and knees. He was twitching wildly, like every muscle in his neck and head were spasming. He widened his stance and thrashed his head towards the ground and out of my line of sight. I was worried that maybe he was having some kind of seizure, so I ran out to check on him, and that's when I saw it. His head was buried deep into the carcass of one of our neighbor's cats. He was chomping down on its tiny body, blood oozing out between the gaps in his teeth. The thing had clearly been dead for at least a day or so. Its body bloated, and its eyes were dull and hazy. Kevin reached inside the cat's body and started to strip off pieces of muscle and tendon, slurping them up the same way he had been eating our mother's cooking. Pressing his thumb into the thing's skull, he popped out one of its eyes and tossed it back like a grape. I ran back into the house and locked the door behind me. I was about to run back to my bedroom when that smell hit me, that horrible death stench that had been wafting around my brother. I opened the door to his room and inched a few feet inside. Wrapped in his bedding were the decaying bodies of 20 or so animals, rabbits, mice, squirrels. I tried to run to my parents' room to wake them up, to tell that we needed to call someone. As I turned around, I saw Kevin in the kitchen window, his body drenched in blood. He was eyeing me through the glass, his head tilted at an angle that shouldn't be possible. The vertebrae in his neck strained underneath his skin. He lunged at the window and I screamed. My parents woke up then. They found me in the hallway, sobbing, sweating, shaking with fear. I told them what I saw, and my dad rushed outside to try and, well, I don't know exactly what he was trying to do, but it didn't matter. My brother was gone. We called the police, and they said it sounded like my brother had had some sort of mental crisis. Maybe he had picked up some kind of parasite in the woods that was impacting his brain chemistry. I know they're wrong, though. Whatever that thing is, it is not my brother. My brother left for the Appalachian Trail and never came back. I think whatever that black smudge was in those photos was something that hunted him. And I think it was successful. Whatever that thing was, killed my brother, and somehow his body came back home. My brother disappeared. But I am terrified he will come back. Part 2. I didn't think I would be making an update, but I figured it was the right thing to do since all of you were so supportive when I posted a few days ago. It all came to a head, I guess, and my family and I are currently living in the worst-case scenario. My parents and the cops were still organizing search parties in the woods surrounding our house. Their working theory was that Kevin had some sort of underlying mental health issue that was made worse by the weeks of isolation on the trail. They also think that maybe he could have been given something or taken something while out there, and the chemical reaction of whatever drug caused some sort of psychosis. I couldn't bring myself to tell them that that thing wasn't my brother. All the comments on my last post made that pretty clear. I don't think I can say that I had accepted the fact he was gone at that point. but I knew whatever we found of him, if we found anything at all, would not be my brother. Well, we did find him. It happened last night. It was late, but my parents were still out with the police and sniffer dogs in the woods. I was told to stay home in case he came back while they were gone. I was sitting in the living room, keeping an eye on the side yard where the woods start to get thicker, when I heard this weird thunking sound. It was slow and paced evenly like a metronome. Thunk, pause, thunk, pause, thunk. From my viewpoint in the living room, I could see a shadow cast across the dining room table, backlit from the streetlights outside. My parents' house is sort of a U-shape. You can walk a circle around the first floor, going from kitchen to dining room to living room and back again. I slipped off the couch and sort of crouch walked my way into the kitchen. From there, I had enough of a cover from the wall dividing the living room and dining room so that I could see the bay window that looked out across the front yard. There was my brother, or rather the thing pretending to be my brother. He was standing in front of the window, rocking back and forth on his heels. He walked to close and his forehead would clunk against the window, thunk. Then he would step back almost like it had surprised him, pause, and then rock forward again, thunk. He looked awful. His skin was sallow and slick with sweat, which made no sense since it's November in New England. It hasn't been above 50 degrees in weeks. His lips were crusted over with blood, and I knew enough at that point to know it wasn't his. The worst thing, though, were his eyes. They were this sickly pale blue. The lenses looked cataract, and his pupils were dilated, unfocused points. My breath hitched in the back of my throat, and my heart felt like it was gonna fall out of my stomach. I kept my eyes trained on him as I reached for my cell phone and tried to dial 911. The phone trilled and I waited for the operator to pick up. There was soft click and then, "Middleton County, 911, do you need fire, police, or ambulance?" I started to speak and then suddenly, Kevin seemed to focus on me. Maybe he had heard my voice. His clouded eyes seemed to laser focus for a moment, training on me crouched behind the wall. I wasn't sure if he could see me. He shouldn't have been able to from his position, but the thunking became louder and more urgent. I gave the operator my name and address. Kevin began to bang into the window faster and faster. I tried to explain that my missing brother was back, but that something was wrong, that he was trying to do something. The crack of the window pane was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I watched as my brother slammed his head again and again into the glass. Blood smeared across his forehead, and then the cracking turned to a smash as my brother crashed through the pane. I screamed. I dropped my phone and I ran. The only room in my parents' house with a lock is the bathroom, so I scrambled to get there and lock the door. Once I was there, I could hear Kevin falling through the broken window and lumbering around the house. His feet sounded unnaturally heavy, like they were waterlogged. I could hear the crunching sound of broken glass under feet, and I looked around for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. I just kept telling myself I would not go down without a fight. As quietly as I could, I took the cover off the back of the toilet tank. It was heavy and made of porcelain, and I figured that even if it didn't kill that thing, hopefully it would at least stun it enough to give me time to make a break for it. I could hear him outside the door, sniffing the air like a dog. I held my breath and readied myself. There was nothing for a few moments. No sounds of walking or sniffing. I waited a few more seconds before I knelt to the ground and peered under the gap in the door. My brother's dead eye stared back at me. I screamed as the door began to bulge as that thing shoved its shoulder into the frame. I grabbed the tank cover again, readied myself. That's when I heard the sirens. I could hear shouting from outside and the stomping of boots across the smashed glass. The thing wouldn't stop. It kept throwing itself against the door. I heard one of the cops yell, "Taser!" and then a rapid clicking noise. There was more shouting, more clicking, and then one of them said, "Stop, or we will shoot." The thing outside the door paused for a moment, and then it charged at the officers. I could hear its heavy feet lurch across the floor. That's when I heard the gunshots. This is where I sort of black out. From what the cops tell me, they were able to get me out of the bathroom. My parents were called back in from the woods and were told their son had been found trying to attack their daughter. They were told that he had been killed after he attempted to attack an officer. We're staying in a hotel now, close to the station. They are going to interview us all again in the morning. They plan on doing an autopsy on my brother. My parents haven't said a word to me since we got here. I think they blame me. I wasn't the one to shoot my brother, but I was the person who called the man who did. I don't know if you all were hoping for some kind of miracle where we get a happy ending, but this is it. Maybe I'll update you all again after the autopsy report is finalized, but honestly, I think it's best to just let it go. My brother Kevin was kind, funny, smart, and most of all adventurous. He wasn't that thing that came home to us. My brother died out on the trail, not bleeding out on the floor in the house we grew up in. I don't think we'll ever have answers unless maybe some of you have them. Hold your loved ones tight tonight. Rest in peace, big brother. I helped a Wendigo, and I regretted it. By T. When this happened, I was living in a small town with lots of forest nearby. It was small, and everybody was friendly with each other, living in an area where everyone knows everyone. My ma and pa didn't really take stranger danger seriously. Don't hop in a stranger's van. Don't take candy from people you don't know well, is the most I was told. Being young at the time, I was taught this. I wasn't told why. I wasn't told of how monstrous humans could truly be. In my innocent mind, I saw no reasons for a person to want to hurt others. I believed this for most other creatures too. I wasn't afraid of animals or insects, so it was no surprise that this would have happened, seeing how stupid I was. It was in early spring and I was going for a usual walk through the neighborhood and into the local woods. Admiring the flowers and listening to the birds' calls, I was drawn further into the darkness that was that fucking forest. Soon I didn't even know where I was. The trees weren't familiar. I was deeper into the woods then. I'd gone before. And just before I traced my steps back home, I heard something. Help. The voice was dry, raspy, and quiet. It sounded strained, like whoever was speaking felt pain to do so. I turned back, trying to find out who or what was calling for me, although my innocent mind was certain it was a person. Over here. I followed the voice and soon found the creature in front of me, its long limbs wrapped in the thorny brambles it was trapped in, its face covered by its long, blood-soaked hair. Please, help me, child. Despite what I wanted to do, my gut told me not to go closer to it. It was dangerous. I ignored the feeling as I tried to remove the brambles from the creature's body. I only succeeded in cutting my hands. I can't get you out, I sadly told the creature. Try harder. You don't want me to die here, do you? It shook its head, removing the few vines I'd managed to pull off its antlers. Of course I don't want you to die. I then remembered my mother's pruning shears. I'd seen her use them to cut plants before, so they should work, right? I'll be right back. I can get some tools to cut you free. As I got up to leave, it grabbed my leg. Don't go. I'll be lonely. We can free me later. The creature pulled me back down to the ground. I stared at it again, noticing all the bones poking through its skin. That's all it really was. Skin and bones. Breaking the eerie silence, it spoke again. My name is Inoki. What is yours? I didn't hesitate to respond. I'm T. After that, we started to talk more, until the sun started going down. Then I went home. That night I stayed awake in bed, wondering about my new friend. How did he get stuck there anyway? The next day I brought the pruning shears, and with some effort I removed the brambles. Inoki never thanked me for the help. He just tried to stand up, but he was too wounded to move. I innocently asked, "Do you want me to go get my parents? They have Band-Aids." But he shook his head. "I need more than that. I need food to get stronger." And so I ran home and got some food, mostly biscuits and some bread. "I can't eat that." He turned away from the food in disgust. "What do you eat then?" He looked around and then pointed at a small bird. It had gotten tangled in the nearby brambles. It was thrashing around trying to get free. "Go get that for me." I remember feeling scared in that moment. I loved birds. Whenever I found a wounded one, I'd try to take care of it before my pa would take it to the vet, while secretly just putting it down. But without even realizing what I was doing, I'd already removed the bird from the brambles. I watched in horror as Inoki ate the poor thing. He didn't seem to like it, but he did anyway. I kept visiting him every day, bringing him more birds or other poor animals for weeks. He was looking better each day, yet still bone thin. Until eventually I came to him with another bird. He wasn't sitting in the place he always sat. I called out for him, but he didn't come. Then I heard the trees above me shake. I looked up just in time to run as it jumped down and chased after me. It caught up to me in no time. It had longer legs and was faster, and it grabbed my leg, and its claws sunk into me. I screamed and screamed until half of the local neighborhood came running into the woods. One or two even had guns. But Inoki got away before he could be killed. I never set foot into the woods again. After I was patched up and told my story to the local newspaper, I was told about what Inoki really was. A Wendigo. I was told I was goddamn lucky to have gotten away, but stupid to have even helped him. My parents moved away after that, and I was properly taught about stranger danger.